Standing in the sterile hallway of Phoenix Global Trade with her heart hammering against her ribs, Tina Osei was about to discover that some mistakes never really end. They just wait in the shadows, patient and relentless, until you're foolish enough to think you've escaped. 3 months earlier, Seoul's Apgujeong district had glittered like a promise wrapped in neon. The streets buzzed with life expensive. Cars, designer boutiques, and people who moved through the world as if they owned it. But beneath the glamorous surface, in a cramped basement lounge called Blue Moon, Tina wiped down sticky tables and counted the hours until closing. The air smelled of stale beer and desperation. A few stragglers occupied the corner booths, their conversations muted by exhaustion or indifference. Tina's feet ached in her worn heels, and her reflection in the bar mirror looked as tired as she felt. 28 years old, and sometimes she wondered if she'd ever stop running on empty. "Table 6 wants another round," Precious called from behind the bar, her voice tinged with sympathy. She was the only person in Seoul who knew just how close to the edge Tina was living. Tina nodded, forcing a smile as she approached the table. Her mind was already calculating. 3 months behind on rent, utilities overdue, and her landlord's threats growing more aggressive by the day. The adoption that had brought her from Nigeria to Korea as a toddler had promised a better life. Her Korean parents had loved her fiercely, but their deaths in a car accident 6 years ago had left her alone in a country that saw her as perpetually foreign. Too African for Korea, too Korean for anywhere else. "You okay?" Precious asked when Tina returned to the bar. She was wiping glasses with methodical precision, her dark eyes concerned. "Just tired," Tina lied. "Always tired. You need to stop taking on extra shifts. You're going to burn out." "Burning out requires having something left to burn," Tina said with a hollow laugh. "I'm just trying to keep the lights on." The last customers filtered out around 2 in the morning. Tina was stacking chairs when the door chimed again. She looked up, ready to say they were closed, but the words died in her throat. The man who entered wore an immaculate charcoal suit that probably cost more than Tina made in 6 months. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with silver threading through his black hair and the kind of posture that suggested military training. Everything about him screamed danger, dressed in expensive fabric. "We're closed," Precious said, but her voice wavered. "I'm not here for a drink." The man's eyes fixed on Tina. "I'm here for Miss Osei." Tina's blood turned to ice. "Who are you?" "My name is Mr. Kwan. I represent certain business interests in the city." He withdrew a slim envelope from his jacket. "I have a proposition for you." "I'm not interested in 5 million won," he interrupted. "For one night's work." The number hit Tina like a physical blow. 5 million won. Enough to pay her rent, clear her debts, and have something left over. It was too much money, which meant whatever he wanted was dangerous, illegal, or both. "What kind of work?" she asked, hating the hope that crept into her voice. "Serving drinks at a private event, tonight. The Celestial Tower in Cheongdam." Mr. Kwan placed the envelope on the nearest table. "Half now, half when the evening concludes. You'll be escorted home safely." "Don't!" Precious hissed, gripping Tina's arm. "You don't know these people." But Tina was already thinking about the eviction notice taped to her door, the way her stomach cramped from skipping meals to save money. She thought about her parents, who had sacrificed so much to give her opportunities, and how she was squandering them one desperate day at a time. "What time?" Tina asked. "Mr. Kwan's expression didn't change. "A car will collect you at midnight. Wear black. Be discreet." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Miss Osei, whatever you see tonight, whatever you hear, forget it the moment you leave. Your memory is not part of what we're paying for." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. "Tina, please," Precious begged. "This is insane. You don't know what you're walking into." Tina picked up the envelope. Inside were crisp bills that felt like both salvation and damnation. "I know I'm 3 months behind on rent. I know I'm out of options. I know I'm tired of drowning. There are other ways." "No," Tina said quietly. "There really aren't." The black sedan that arrived at midnight was silent as a hearse. Tina climbed into the back seat, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The driver said nothing as they glided through Seoul's late-night streets, leaving the familiar chaos of Apgujeong behind for the hushed wealth of Cheongdam. The Celestial Tower loomed against the night sky like a tombstone. Everyone in Seoul knew the stories, the luxury high-rise that had been abandoned mid-construction when the developer mysteriously disappeared. Officially, it was a monument to financial collapse, Unofficially, whispers suggested it had been claimed by something far more dangerous than bankruptcy. From the outside, the building looked dead, windows dark, construction, scaffolding rusting in the rain. But as Tina was led through a service entrance, the interior transformed. Chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors, rich carpets, muffled footsteps. The air smelled of expensive cologne and even more expensive whiskey. "This way," murmured a woman in a sharp black suit, gesturing toward a service area where other servers were preparing trays. "You'll circulate on the main floor. Do not engage in conversation unless directly addressed. Do not ask questions. Do not make eye contact with the guests unless serving them. Understood?" Tina nodded, her mouth too dry for words. The main floor was a study in controlled chaos. Perhaps 50 people filled the space, all men except for a handful of women who moved with the careful grace of those who understood the rules of survival. The conversations were hushed but intense, punctuated by occasional laughter that never quite reached anyone's eyes. Tina recognized the atmosphere from movies and news reports. This was power negotiating with itself, violence dressed in three-piece suits. She moved through the crowd with her tray, invisible and hyper-aware. Fragments of conversation reached her ears, mentions of shipments, territories, political connections. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but 5 million won was 5 million won, and she'd already taken half. Then the room changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air pressure, conversations trailing off mid-sentence. Tina looked up and saw him. Choi Kai entered like winter itself, cold and absolute. He was younger than most of the men in the room, perhaps mid-30s, but he commanded a respect that had nothing to do with age. His face was beautiful, in a dangerous way, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, and eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. He wore all black, and the color suited him like a second skin. The crowd parted without being asked. Men who moments ago had carried themselves with arrogance, now bowed their heads slightly as Kai passed. He acknowledged them with the barest of nods, his attention elsewhere, scanning the room with the focus of a predator. And then his eyes found Tina. Time stuttered. She froze with her tray of empty glasses, caught in his gaze like a moth in amber. For a moment that stretched impossibly long, they simply looked at each other. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. Something that suggested she'd caught him as off guard as he'd caught her. Then someone spoke to him, and the moment broke. Kai turned away, and Tina remembered to breathe. She spent the next hour trying to become invisible, but she felt his attention like heat against her skin. Twice more, their eyes met across the room, and each time sent electricity down her spine. This was dangerous. This was insane. This was exactly the kind of thing that destroyed lives. Near midnight, Tina stepped onto the rooftop terrace for air. The city sprawled below, a sea of lights that made her feel small and lost. She gripped the railing, trying to steady her racing heart. Beautiful, isn't it? She spun around. Kai stood in the doorway, backlit by the golden light from inside. Up close, he was even more devastating, tall and lean, with the kind of presence that bent the world around him. "I'm sorry." Tina stammered. "I didn't mean to. I can go back inside." "Stay." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. He moved to stand beside her at the railing, maintaining careful distance. "You're new. This is my first night. I can tell. You look terrified. Should I be?" The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "Probably. What's your name?" "Tina." "Tina Osei. Korean name with an African surname. Interesting. Adopted," she said shortly. "I'm Nigerian by birth, Korean by paperwork. And which one do you feel?" The question surprised her. Most people didn't ask, and if they did, they didn't really want an honest answer. Neither. Both. "I don't know anymore." Kai turned to look at her fully, and his expression had shifted into something almost human. "I understand that feeling, being caught between worlds, not quite belonging anywhere." "You?" She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "You look like you own every world you walk into." "Owning something and belonging in it are very different things," he said quietly. Then, as if catching himself being too honest, his expression shuddered again. "Why are you here, Tina Osei?" "Money." "Same reason most people do things they shouldn't. Honest. I appreciate that." He studied her for a long moment. "You should leave Seoul." This isn't a safe city for people like you. People like me? People who still have something to lose. The words hung between them, heavy with implication, with a raised phoenix emblem in gold. No words, no explanation. Tina dressed quickly, her hands shaking. What had she done? She'd slept with a man who was clearly dangerous, a man whose name alone had made the entire party fall silent. She'd crossed a line she could never uncross, and now she had to live with the consequences. She fled the penthouse like a ghost fleeing dawn. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of anxiety. Tina returned to Blue Moon, threw herself into work, and tried to convince herself that night had been an aberration, a fever dream that would fade with time. She paid her rent, cleared her debts, and tried not to think about dark eyes and the way her name had sounded in Kai's voice. Then Blue Moon burned. It happened on a Tuesday night, just after closing. Tina had left only minutes before, walking to the bus. Stop when she heard the explosion. She turned to see flames erupting from the basement entrance, orange and furious against the night sky. Glass shattered, smoke billowed, and people screamed, "Precious." God, was Precious still inside? Tina ran back, but hands grabbed her, held her back. Fire trucks arrived, sirens wailing. Later, she learned that Precious had left early, that no one had died, but the message was clear. This wasn't an accident. This was a warning. That night, huddled in her apartment with the lights off, Tina discovered she was pregnant. The test showed 2 pink lines, clear and damning. She took 3 more tests, each confirming what her body had already been trying to tell her. The nausea, the exhaustion, the way her breasts had been tender, all signs she'd been too stressed to notice. She was carrying Choi Kai's child, a man she'd spent 1 night with, a man who commanded criminals with a look, a man who'd given her money and disappeared like smoke. Tina's hands shook as she stared at the tests lined up on her bathroom counter. She had 3 choices: terminate the pregnancy, try to find Kai and tell him, or disappear. The first option made her heart clench with unexpected grief. The second was suicide. What would a man like that do with an inconvenient complication? The third was the only one that made sense. She called Precious first. "I need to leave Seoul tonight." "Tina, what's happening?" "I can't explain, but that night at the Celestial Tower, I think I'm in danger. Will you help me?" There was a long pause. Then, "Where will you go?" "Incheon. I have a distant cousin there. She'll take me in, at least for a while." "This is because of that man, isn't it? The one who hired you?" "Please, Precious, I just need to disappear." Another pause. "Okay, I'll help you pack." By dawn, Tina was on a bus to Incheon with everything she owned in 2 suitcases. She watched Seoul disappear through the rear window, the city that had given her everything and taken it all back. She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach and made a promise. Whatever it took, she would protect this child. She would give them the life she'd always dreamed of. She had no idea there were 2 of them. Incheon was a different kind of survival. Tina's cousin, Eunji, lived in a cramped apartment near the port and worked 2 jobs herself. She gave Tina a corner of her living room and asked no questions, for which Tina was desperately grateful. Finding work while obviously pregnant proved nearly impossible. Employers took one look at her growing belly and suddenly had no positions available. The discrimination was subtle but relentless. Finally, she found work at a small fish market, cleaning and filleting for cash under the table. The pregnancy was difficult. Tina was sick constantly, her body struggling with twins she didn't know she was carrying until the ultrasound. The technician's surprise, "Oh, there are 2, had sent Tina into a panic. Attacks so severe they'd almost admitted her. Twins! She was going to have twins. Alone. But when Senna and Juna were born on a rainy September morning, tiny and perfect and utterly dependent, Tina felt something shift in her chest. Love fierce and protective and all-consuming. These girls were hers. They were beautiful, with her dark skin and their father's sharp features, and she would die before she let anything hurt them. The years that followed were brutal. Tina worked constantly cleaning offices at night, waitressing during the day, sometimes watching her daughters sleep for 5 minutes before rushing to the next job. Senna and Juna grew up in daycare centers and with babysitters, and the guilt gnawed at Tina constantly. But she was building something. Savings, stability, a future. She never told them about their father. How could she? What would she say? That she'd spent one reckless night with a dangerous man and they were the consequence? that their father was likely a criminal who commanded fear with a look. Instead, she told them fairy tales. She told them their daddy was a prince from a faraway kingdom who had loved their mother very much but had to stay in his kingdom. The girls accepted this with the easy faith of children, and Tina's heart broke a little more each time they asked when the prince was coming to visit. By the time the twins turned 5, Tina had saved enough money and built enough of a resume to apply for better positions. When the offer came from Phoenix Global Trade, a prestigious logistics company in Seoul with good pay and benefits, she cried in the bathroom of her tiny apartment. "We're moving back to Seoul," she told the girls that night. "Will we meet Daddy there?" Senna asked, her dark eyes wide with hope. "Maybe someday, baby," Tina lied, and hated herself for it. Seoul had changed and stayed exactly the same. The streets of Apgujeong still glittered with expensive promise. The coffee shop where Tina bought her morning coffee now charged twice what it had 5 years ago. But underneath, the bones of the city were unchanged, still ambitious, still ruthless, still beautiful in its cruelty. Tina found a small apartment in a decent neighborhood, enrolled the girls in a good school, and started her first day at Phoenix Global Trade with cautious optimism. The company occupied a sleek glass tower in Gangnam, all modern architecture and corporate professionalism. Her orientation was efficient and impersonal. "Here's your desk, here's your login, here's the break room. You'll meet Director Choi tomorrow," her supervisor said. "He likes to personally welcome all new hires in administrative roles." Tina nodded, only half listening. Director Choi was probably some middle-aged executive with a golf hobby and a loveless marriage. She had reports to file and spreadsheets to learn. The real work of surviving was just beginning. That night, putting the girls to bed, Tina felt something close to peace. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd built a life. Maybe Seoul could be a fresh start, a place where the past stayed buried and the future held possibility. She should have known better. The next morning, Tina dressed carefully in her best professional outfit, a navy blazer and pencil skirt that she'd bought specifically for this job. She styled her hair, applied minimal makeup, and practiced her confident smile in the bathroom mirror. First impressions mattered, and she was determined to make a good one. "You look pretty, Mommy," Juna said, tugging on her skirt. "Thank you, baby." Tina kissed her forehead. "Be good for Auntie Min today, okay?" The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless. Tina's palms were sweaty, her heart racing with nerves that were completely normal for meeting your boss for the first time. The hallway was hushed, carpeted in dove gray, with abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than her annual salary. The receptionist smiled. "Director Choi is ready for you. Go right in." Tina knocked once, then opened the door. The office was enormous windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture, everything in shades of black and gray. And behind the massive desk, turning from where he'd been gazing out the window, was Choi Kai. Time stopped. The world tilted on its axis. Tina's carefully rehearsed greeting died in her throat as 5 years collapsed into nothing. He looked exactly the same sharp features, the same dark eyes, the same dangerous beauty that had undone her completely. His expression cycled through shock, recognition, and something unreadable before settling into careful neutrality. "Miss Osei, please, sit down." Tina's legs carried her to the chair on autopilot. Her mind was screaming. Phoenix Global Trade. Of course. The Phoenix on the black card, he'd left her. This wasn't a legitimate company, it was a front. Had to be. And she'd walked right back into his world. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know." Clearly, Kai sat behind his desk, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. 5 years, Tina. You disappeared completely. No trace, no contact. I had my reasons. I'm sure you did. His eyes were cold now, evaluating. The question is whether those reasons still apply. Tina's hands clenched in her lap. "Mr. Choi, Kai. We're well past formalities, don't you think?" The intimacy in his voice sent shivers down her spine. "This is a mistake. I should resign. You just started." That would look suspicious. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Tina, why did you really come back to Seoul? And don't tell me it was for this job. You're intelligent enough to have researched the company. You would have seen my name." "I didn't research that deeply," she admitted. "I needed the job, the salary, the benefits. I have." She stopped herself. "You have what?" "Responsibilities." Kai's eyes narrowed. "What kind of responsibilities?" This was it. The moment where she could come clean or dig herself deeper into lies. Tina thought of Senna and Juna, their bright smiles and innocent questions about their father. She thought of what a man like Kai would do if he knew the truth. Student loans, she lied. Debts. The usual. He studied her for a long moment, and Tina had the terrible feeling he knew she wasn't telling the truth. Well, Miss Oze, welcome to Phoenix Global Trade. I expect excellent work from all my employees. Don't disappoint me. I won't. Good. You're dismissed. Tina stood on shaking legs, heading for the door. She was reaching for the handle when Kai spoke again. Tina. She froze but didn't turn around. I know about the twins. Her blood turned to ice. Slowly, she turned to face him. What? Kai stood, moving around his desk with predatory grace. Did you really think you could hide from me? I've had people watching you since you arrived in Incheon. I know where you live. I know where your daughters go to school. I know they're 5 years old, born 9 months after our night together. Stay away from them, Tina whispered, fear making her voice shake. They're mine too, aren't they? He was close now. Too close. Sina and Juna. Beautiful names. They have your eyes. Kai, please, I'm not going to hurt them, Tina. I'm not a monster. His jaw tightened. But we need to talk about everything. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I'll send a car to your apartment, and if I refuse, then I'll show up at your door and your daughters will meet their father for the first time in a much less controlled environment. Your choice. Tina felt tears prick her eyes. You're backing me into a corner. Yes, he said simply, because you left me no other option. You took my children and ran, Tina. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? I was protecting them. From what? From me? His voice rose slightly, the first crack in his controlled demeanor. I would never hurt them. I would never hurt you. But you didn't give me the chance to prove that, did you? You decided I was a monster and ran. You are a monster, Tina shot back. You run a criminal organization. You terrify people with a look. That night at the Celestial Tower, I saw what you are, Kai. And I wasn't going to let my children grow up in that world. Our children, he corrected coldly. And you're already back in that world, whether you want to admit it or not. You work for me now. You live in a city I have significant influence over. There is nowhere in Seoul you can go that I can't reach. The words hung between them, heavy and threatening. Tina felt her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. What do you want from me? The truth, Kai said. All of it. Tomorrow night. And after that, we figure out how to move forward. There is no moving forward. There's just survival. Then we'll survive together. Tina left his office on trembling legs, her mind racing. She had 24 hours to figure out what to do. 24 hours before the father of her children, a dangerous, powerful man she'd spent 5 years running from, demanded answers she wasn't sure she could give. That evening, watching Senna and Juna play with their dolls, Tina's phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was simple. I'm not your enemy, Tina. But I will be in my daughters' lives. Accept that, or fight me. Either way, tomorrow, we talk. Tina looked at her girls, her beautiful, innocent girls who knew nothing of the world closing in around them. Senna looked up and smiled, holding up a drawing. Look, Mommy, I drew the prince from your phone. Tina's heart stopped. What? The man in the picture. From your phone. The one you look at sometimes when you think we're sleeping. With shaking hands, Tina took the drawing. In crayon and childish lines, but unmistakable, was Kai's face. She must have still had that photo, buried deep in her phone's memory, and Senna had found it somehow. Is that Daddy? Juna asked, crowding close. Tina opened her mouth to lie, to deflect, to protect them from the truth. But before she could speak, she looked out the window and saw it. A black car parked across the street. In the driver's seat, barely visible in the gathering dark, was a figure watching their apartment. Her phone buzzed again. Sleep well, Tina. Tomorrow, everything changes. As Tina pulled her daughters close, their small bodies warm and trusting against hers, she understood with terrible clarity that running was no longer an option. The past had caught up, the future was uncertain, and the man she'd spent one desperate night with 5 years ago was about to upend her entire world. Tomorrow, she would face him. Tomorrow, she would have to tell her daughters the truth. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for just a few more hours, she could hold them and pretend they were still safe. that the prince in their fairy tale was still an ocean away, and not parked outside their window, waiting with the patience of a man who'd learned that nothing worth having ever came easy. The city lights flickered on across Seoul, indifferent and beautiful, as Tina whispered prayers she wasn't sure anyone was listening to, and held her daughters like they might disappear if she let go. He knows about the twins. He knows where she lives. The only thing he doesn't know is what she's about to do next. If you're hooked already, then prove it. Smash. Like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so the next episode finds you.